Hello, and welcome to the Nurturing Resilience podcast, where me, your host, Leisha Nelson, weaves together the worlds of somatics, science, and energetics to nurture a deeper connection to yourself. This is a podcast that covers a span of topics and ideas from guest storytelling their rites of passage that catalyzed their resiliency, to nervous system and mind body health education, to deep contemplation on topics such as cultivating connection to ourselves and others in a complex world. I'm an occupational therapist, somatic practitioner, and body worker, attachment specialist, and baby whisperer with over 20 years of experience with mind body connection and supporting matrescence. What you're receiving today and listening today is the uncut version of my podcast. This is where I interview guests and I don't do any editing. You're getting it all in the raw. If you're interested in my podcast, you can find that on Spotify, which is the edited version. And if you're interested in my work, you can follow me on Instagram at Leisha Nilsson and also through my website at leishanilsson.com. If you enjoy what you hear today, if you enjoy this podcast, please share it on your social media pages with your friends, your family, your loved ones. Let the world know that it's here. If you really like it, you can follow me and write a review. That's how my podcast gets out to listeners like you. And this important information about the body, somatics, and nervous system can find more people that need it. All right, thanks so much, and let's dive in. Hello, and welcome to today's episode. It's a little impromptu, but not too impromptu. I joined a women's circle last night locally where I live here in Salt Lake City. And surprisingly enough, there were people there that listened to this podcast, to my podcast. And I don't know why I'm always still so surprised when I find people that listen to my episodes and really enjoy the information that I put out there. This podcast started as a complete passion project of really just wanting to talk to people and hear their stories. I love how Kate Kavanaugh talks a lot about the modern day podcast as the campfire, or the place where we gather and hear stories. And that struck something in me years ago when I first heard that analogy, where one of my gifts is to hold space for people to tell their story, and really wanting to normalize the human experience and realizing that what we are experiencing that we think is so individual is actually very common as part of this human journey and this human life. And so this podcast really did start as a exploration, a journey into storytelling, and something that I do on the side in my daytime, everyday job. So when I meet people that are excited about this information and what I put out and the stories that I'm telling and the information that I'm telling, I'm always a little taken back and honored and have so much gratitude. And I have been sitting with, do I share what's been going on in my life for about the last 6 months? It's been a very interesting 6 months, needless to say. And after last night and meeting some new friends and some new people and women in my community, I decided, okay, yes, the podcast needs to continue. I've known that it's needed to continue, and trusting the form that it's going to take this year. It seems like every year, the podcast, which has an energy and a life of its own, kind of lets me know and dictates what this year is going to look like. Last night was a reconfirmation that, yes, this needs to continue. People need a place to continue to tell their stories, especially stories around trauma that they have navigated through to the other side, and the resiliency that humans have. It's such a fascinating subject for me. If you haven't listened to my first episode on resiliency, please go back and listen to that. And it really is such an amazing quality that we as humans have, that we keep going. No matter what happens, we keep going. And why does that happen? I don't know. It's amazing to me. It happens for different reasons for different people. So I know that I'll continue on that path and sharing stories. I always open it up to my listeners that if you have a story to tell, if you'd like to come on the podcast and be a guest, please do so. Last year, I started to introduce some more podcasts that were less about storytelling and more about information, and getting information out into the world that I think is really important. And I will continue to do that as well this year. And I also really want to go back to the roots of humanity, of us living our lives and the storytelling that happens from living our lives, and the hope that each of us can realize just the human experience, and that we're not so isolated and alone in this human experience. That was one of the beautiful things that came through in the women's ceremony last night, was many of us, regardless of our share, regardless of our backgrounds, regardless of our paths, there were synchronicities within a group of about 15 of us, that there was an interweaving where something that someone said resonated with someone else that was a complete stranger, because they too were experiencing that thing. One theme that came up very strong was feeling your feelings and grief, and moving through anger, and what it is like to be in a human body and feel emotions. I will only speak to my own experience out of respect for the other people. As I was speaking and doing my own share and sharing what's been happening for me the last 6 months about the emotions that I'm feeling and the grief that I've been moving through the last 6 months, I realized that I do need to share what I've been moving through the last 6 months. And I hope it resonates with you. I hope in a way that you feel the humanness that all of us are, and that from that you can start to feel that it's okay to feel your feelings. It's okay that we have anger. It's okay that we have grief. It's okay that we have happiness. And I think this is a beautiful segue actually into my next podcast that I'll be releasing very close to this one with Melissa, of what it's like to feel these emotions and just be in our bodies. My goal last year for this podcast was to release 2 episodes a month, and I was on track for that. It was really amazing. I was really proud of myself. And then I went to Peru. Those of you that follow me on social media may have known that I went on this big trip. It was about 2 weeks, and it was completely life-changing. And when I came home from Peru, I didn't have the capacity to produce a podcast twice a week. I didn't have capacity to do a lot of things because my inner world had been turned upside down in a very difficult and a very beautiful way. So I went to Peru unexpectedly. It wasn't necessarily planned. I knew about a month or 2 prior that I was going. I was invited with a group of other people, and I don't want to go too much into the details. I'm happy to have a one-on-one conversation if anyone has more curiosity around that. Maybe in the future, I will share more. I will say that I did work deeply with 2 older women shamans that have been practicing their whole life, that is part of their family lineage, that started training in shamanism as young as 13 years old from their fathers, which came from their grandfathers, and were in their 60s and 70s. And it was an honor. It was an honor to be with two older women where shamanism and healing is passed on generationally. And there is a deep understanding of the interconnectedness between mind, body, and spirit. And by spirit, I also mean not just our own spirit, but the spirit of the plants and the spirit of the land and the spirit of animals and the spirits of our ancestors. And the concept that when there is disease and when there is illness and when there is trauma, that it's a disconnection not only from our own body and spirit, but also the spirit of the land and the spirit of our ancestors and the interconnectedness that unfortunately our society doesn't have between ourselves and the makings of spirit world. And I'm very careful to talk too much about these things. One of the pieces I've been moving through since coming home is I really honor the medical world and the medical sciences and the research. And my background as an occupational therapist and my studies and deeply in anatomy and neuroscience. And I love all that stuff. And I hold a very professional line in this science way. And also, I am a bridge to the more spiritual practices, the more energetic practices, and starting to be more open that in my practice with craniosacral therapy and body work, I bring in spirit because I'm working with energy, because we cannot separate mind, body, spirit. We cannot separate body from energy. And this fear growing up in society that it's not safe to talk about doing energy work, or it's not safe to talk about spirit. It's not safe to talk about connection with the land. And that's shifting. I see that shifting and changing. A deep fear within myself is that if I talk about those things, the people that need the practicality and the science will not come see me as clients, that my business will fail. So back to Peru and receiving deep healing from two beautiful shamans that holds mind, body, spirit, mind, body, soul, that the healing has to include all aspects. And what has transformed in myself over the last 6 months since receiving that work has helped me understand on a deeper level how important it is to include things like our connection with the land, our connection with spirit, our connection with each other. And that disease is not just a physical thing, it's somatic and it's spirit based. Our spirit is out of alignment. And we cannot just look at one aspect, we have to look at all aspects. So I found myself deeply grieving in Peru. I found myself crying a lot. I found myself really unsure why I was crying, but that my body was releasing years of repressed grief from childhood, from my little baby self, from my ancestors. As I spoke about yesterday in the women's circle, for the grief that I feel collectively on this planet, for the things that are happening. And for the first time, it's really interesting being a body worker. And I've been in this world for 15 years and have been doing deep work on myself for 15 years and so connected to my body and so connected to my emotions. And then find this new chasm of emotion, of grief in my body that needed to be purged, that needed to move through me in a really deep and beautiful and sometimes scary and sometimes wild way. And if we start to look at emotion and we start to understand, well, what is emotion and what are feelings? They can be described as very feminine or very yin. There's no structure to them. They just kind of come and go. They're very watery. They can be dark. It's that yin energy. And it's so much of the yin or the feminine energy that has been repressed, or that we have been told, like, we have been raised in our society, like, we need structure, we need format, we need masculinity, we need the more yang energy. And to fear some of that really wild and chaotic feminine yin energy, which is the grief. It is the wildness and the rawness that our bodies feel. That is the feminine energy. And to go to a foreign country to receive healing, of course, from feminine shamans. There's a reason why I chose female shamans. And to find these places of grief within my own body, and for the first time, really allow them to move through me. Really allow my body to feel that wild and chaotic energy and not have to make a story about it, not have to know why. My own intuition and my own feeling and the insights I've received is a lot of what I'm grieving is ancestral. A lot of what I'm grieving is familial for my family of origin. And all the things that as a child I didn't have the space or the knowledge how to do. And I'll also name, like, my teacher, currently my mentor, Kate White. If you haven't listened to that podcast where I interview her about pre and perinatal work, please go back and listen to that. For me personally, Kate has been a great teacher. Working with her and learning that emotions are like waves. They come and they go. And that no matter what, the emotion, just like a wave or just like a cycle, again, that very feminine energy will pass. And to remind myself that no matter what emotion I'm feeling, anger, rage, grief, fear, that it cycles. It will leave, it will stop. And I come to the other side, which is calmness, groundedness, happiness, joy. That it comes and goes just like a wave, the wave of emotions. And that there's nothing to fear in that, because if I think about my whole life and what I've experienced, I always stop crying. I always stop being angry. I always move through it. I have always come back to the other side. So I have built resiliency in my system. My system is very resilient. And the more that I allow myself to go to those spaces and sink deeper into whatever feeling or whatever emotion that I have, I actually build my resiliency, and I wire that within my nervous system that, like, oh, I can feel this thing and I can grieve this thing, whether it's collective or ancestral or personal, and I will move through it. I will stop crying. And I really have Kate to thank for that, for, like, really teaching me that lesson and teaching me to understand that it's a wave and it comes and it goes. So when I came home for Peru, I really had no capacity to record podcasts. I was in a very big transformational process. I was still deeply grieving and really starting to get more clear what I was doing with my life and what I am doing with my life. And honestly, I don't think we ever figure it out. I think if someone says, like, oh, I know what I'm doing and I know who I am, like, that might be true for the moment for them, but I don't think it's permanent. And we all, again, cycles. There's a theme here to this podcast, apparently. yes, I've had moments where I know what I'm doing and what I want to do and goals. And I have moments where I have no clue what I'm doing. And I'm trying to figure it out and just really starting to create compassion for myself when I don't know what I'm doing and I'm trying to figure things out. And when I came home from Peru and really started to allow this grief to move through my body and start to clear it out, so to speak. Like once I cried and once I went to these deep places of grief, it's like with that came clarity. Once I allowed myself to feel these feelings and be a human in my messiness, the other side of that was clarity. I will say that this took a lot of rest. This took a lot of like nutritional eating and really caring for my body and days off social media and time in the nature to really nurture these spaces where I was and still probably am navigating. So, the more clarity that I had, I just really started to realize some big pieces in my life about my path, the direction, my so called dharma, like what I'm here to do. I also acknowledging Kate, like one of the questions she asks a lot is, are you living your life the way you want to be living your life? Are you doing exactly what you want to be doing? And what is it? Like when you wake up in the morning, what is it that you want to be doing? Do that thing. As crazy as it sounds, because that's what we need in this world. We need people living their dharma and their truth and fulfilling their happiness. And society likes to come in, and of course, we need to make money. And of course, like so much gratitude that I live in a house and that I have money to pay for groceries. And it's this whole collective piece of how can we start to create balance between living our dharma, which means we might not be making loads of money to make us a millionaire, versus making money to be millionaires because that's what society says we need to do and own lots of things. That's one of the things I've been grieving is like, I don't think my dharma is to be a billionaire. Maybe I'll be surprised. And getting really, really clear on that. Getting really, really clear on what is this thing? What makes me happy? What am I here to do? And, the last 2 years I've already slowly been on this path, but really getting clear and committing myself and returning to supporting babies, supporting mothers, supporting the birth process, and helping people that have experienced birth trauma, whether that's through body work or online sessions, and just getting very, very clear with that. And so some of you may have noticed this transition over the last year. If you've been paying attention, some of you might have no clue. But as I became more clear and tuning into my dharma and some of my happiness, it's owning that my gifts are to work with babies. And my understanding of being able to understand the baby's experience and work with babies and attune to babies in a very different way than the rest of the world moves. And educating people and working with mothers to hold the baby's experience and hold the mother's experience. Which means because babies are nonverbal and they feel the world all through their sensory system, that part of that includes soul and spirit, because babies are of soul and spirit. That is how they move through the world. and starting to transition less and less and less away from the coaching industry in this space of like, I'm an online coach and identifying with that identity more towards body work, supporting people online, but in a very somatic space, and from a space of pre and perinatal work, and from a space of supporting birth trauma resolution. And part of that process and part of this transition the last year, but especially since coming home from Peru, has meant working more days in a physical practice, letting my local community know, like, hey, I'm coming back to body work, connecting with midwives that do home births and that really understand this piece, connecting with doulas in the community that that understand and know these things, and a deep desire to work more with doulas and midwives and start to explain and understand and teach that our own birth imprints and our own birth stories can affect our clients and the birth rooms that we step into. So that working through our own births and our own birth imprints is vital, vital if you are going to be working with babies, because babies will pick up on your birth imprints. And part of what I've had to do most recently is move offices so that I could work more days a week. I was in a shared office space, in a physical shared office space. And in order to see more clients and work more days a week, I needed to be back into my own space and creating that. So the last couple of weeks have been wild, moving out of a space that I've been in for 7 years. Talk about a 7-year cycle, right? And move into a space where I can be available more days a week. So all of this, needless to say, has transitioned from me feeling my feelings. All of this clarity, all of where I'm taking my business, how I'm moving through the world, how I will be stepping into this podcast, producing the podcast, which will be about once a month instead of bi-monthly, has come from me feeling my feelings and me grieving. And I'm not perfect at it. I'm very much a human on this journey, trying to, figure things out and do the best I can and be as compassionate and gentle with myself as I move through this journey. And if there's anything I can instill in you guys is like, here's where the last 6 months have been. This is why I haven't produced a podcast. Here's the direction the podcast is going. This is the direction my business is going. Like, all of this has come from allowing myself to grieve without making a story about it, without making it mean anything, but allowing my body to be a vessel and feel it and move it. Move through it. And I'm sure there's more. I'm sure I'm not done. I joke with people like, I just cry now. Like I do. And I say this in my podcast with Melissa. And I wish we lived in a society where like we didn't even have to give that as a caveat. Where I didn't even have to say to people, oh, I'm a crier. It's like, can we just live in a society where that's accepted? That crying is actually a very beautiful thing and a way to create vulnerability and intimacy. That's the world I'm moving towards. As I shared in Women's Circle last night, like I'm okay being an example for that. Those of you that follow human design, I'm a 6'2", and part of my 6 is like leading by this example and being a little ahead of my time and really showing people like, yeah, this is how we cry. This is how we're angry. This is how we feel our feelings. This is how we get joyful. Like so much joy. I think I haven't spoken to that enough. Is like the amount of joy I've also felt in the last 6 months is unexplainable because there's not a language for how my body feels at the amount of joy I have also felt. So if I can be an example for that, an example for when you feel your feelings, when you're a human, when we move through these things, we allow our body to be a vessel. We don't fear the feminine. We don't fear the emotions. We allow it to happen. The other side of that is clarity and joy and the resiliency. Okay, that's all I'm going to say. I'm really excited to be back doing podcasts again because my bodywork business is busier and takes more capacity and more time and more energy than when I was doing online coaching. It likely won't be as frequent. My goal is once a month. We'll see if I meet that. Fingers crossed. The things I say all the time that really help me is when you tell me, like, hey, I really enjoyed this podcast. This was great. Thank you. When you leave a review on Spotify or Apple, like, please, that really, really helps me too. And also when you share episodes with your friends and family members, if something strikes you, like, please pass it along. Share it on your social media pages and tag me. I'm very active on Instagram, not so much Facebook. But it really does help me if you think of things, and my podcast is like having its own energy and its own life form. It helps the energy of the podcast. It helps the energy in the life form for this to continue to flow and reach more people. So that's it. That's the update. That's been my life the last 6 months. And I really am looking forward to the next year. And I hope you are too.